Have you ever wondered what it would be like to wake up every day knowing that your body doesn't belong to you? What your hands, your sweat, your dreams, is everything the property of someone who doesn't even consider you human? I have something to tell you today that it will make you question everything you think you know about resistance. A story that has been buried in the dark corners of our history, but carries such a strong force that even after so long, still shake the power structures when told. What happened that night in Charleston was not just another case of revenge. It was a silent scream that echoed for generations. A moment when people treated like objects have proved that no current is strong enough to imprison the desire to be free. And the most amazing? What I will reveal to you now has been kept away from official history books because it exposes truths that many would rather keep hidden. I am digging up facts that very few people know. If you are interested in real stories that show the darker side of our history, but also the unshakable strength of the human spirit, it continues with me until the end. Plays in like to help me bring more cases like this. I promise you that after this story, you will never look at the southern cotton plantations with the same eyes again. Some revelations change the way we see the world forever. And now, get ready to know the story of the night that changed Charleston forever. The sun slowly puts itself over the ruins of the old Willow Creek plantation, 20 miles from Charleston, South Carolina. Orange rays penetrate between the cracks of the stone walls, projecting elongated shadows in what one day was the main barn. The smell of wet earth mixes with the sweet aroma of the magnolias, while the wind whispers between the twisted branches of the centenary oaks. These trees, silent witnesses, keep secrets of a time when blood waged the earth as much as rain. There are stories that time tries to erase, but that the earth refuses to forget. Cassandra Monroe's story is one of them, a woman who turned pain into planning, humiliation into strategy, and fear into such a relentless force that not even the powerful slave system of 1874 could contain. Amid the ashes of what was the Blackwood cotton empire, there is an almost imperceptible symbol carved in the wood, a scythe crossed with a key. For the unsuspecting, only meaningless marks. For those who know the true story, it is the emblem of the night when 5 female were found quartered during the harvest festival. A night that changed the balance of power throughout the region and inspired a wave of resistance that spread as fire in dry straw by southern states. No atrocity is unanswered forever. This truth echoes through the ruins of Willow Creek, reminding us that justice, when denied it too long, finds unexpected ways to speak. If you want to follow more cases like this, which move with all society and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel so as not to lose any investigation. The Willow Creek property extended for over 500 acres of fertile land on the banks of the Ashley River. The Big House, an imposing 3-story Georgian structure with white columns that seemed to pierce the sky, dominated the top of the hill. From their balconies, the Blackwood family could contemplate their empire, endless cotton, tobacco, and rice fields that stretched to the horizon, dotted by curved figures under the sun's sunny sun. The housing of the enslaved, 5 rectangular structures of time, darkened wood, formed a half-mile semicircle of the main house, strategically positioned for the wind to carry the odors away from aristocratic noses, but close enough to make the work bell hanging in a wooden tower could be heard with the first ray of sun. The hierarchy was as rigid as the currents that occasionally arrested the problematic. At the top, the patriarch Cornelius Blackwood, whose fortune had grown even more after the Civil War through schemes with corrupt authorities of Reconstruction. Below him, his wife Martha and 3 children, all educated at northern universities, but who returned with even more cruel ideas on how to manage human properties. Then came the 5 fans, men of poor origins who compensated for their low social position with extreme brutality. Jackson Reed, the main foreman, known for his 9-pointed whip he called Educator. The brothers Connor and Patrick O'Malley, Irish who had perfected the use of dogs to hunt fugitives, Samuel Winston, specialist in psychological punishments, and Elijah Potts, the youngest and perhaps the more sadistic, which meticulously registered each whipping in a leather-bound notebook. For 87 men, women, and enslaved children, the day began at 4 a.m. with the sound of bell. In the summer, they worked 18 hours under the scorching sun, with only one noon break for a meal of cornmeal and rancid bacon. Called hands picked up white cotton that stained red when the sharp capsules cut the skin. The constant creak of the cotton presses mingled with the occasional crack of the whips and the metallic noise of the shackles. On full moon nights, the sound of forbidden drums could sometimes be heard, very low, coming from the swamp adjacent to the property, a reminder that not everything could be controlled, not even in Willow Creek. And it was during one of these nights that Cassandra Monroe, looking at the moon reflected in the dark waters of the Ashley River, had the first glimpse of what would become the most feared uprising in the region. On the horizon, dark clouds began to form, announcing a storm. The elders said that when lightning cut the sky without rain, the spirits were restless. That night the lightnings did not stop until dawn. Among Willow Creek slaves, Cassandra Monroe occupied a unique position. At 32, she had been trained since her 12 as assistant to the main cook of the big house, a function that put her in daily contact with the Blackwood family and her frequent guests. Cassandra knew not only every corner of the property, but also the secrets muttered in the corridors, the weaknesses of the ladies, the routines that governed life in the plantation with the accuracy of a clock. His skilled hands were known to prepare the most delicate French dishes that impressed Charleston's visitors, but few knew that these same fingers could identify the properties of each herb that grew in surrounding swamps. As she served the banquets, her eyes captured details that went unnoticed: which of the overseers drank to fall, which doors remained unlocked at night, which conversations revealed vulnerabilities in the seemingly impenetrable system of the plantation. Cassandra's skin, clearer than the majority, resulting from generational violence that she even knew completely, allowed her a peculiar traffic between worlds. For the Blackwood, it was just another privileged mulatto to those who gave the honor of serving directly to the family. For the enslaved community, it was a vital channel of information, remedies, and occasionally, small victories, an avoided roofing here, an extra feed there, news from the outside world that would never otherwise reach lodgings. This duality manifested itself in the most unexpected moments. One day, it could be seen by serving tea with refined gestures in the main hall, speaking impeccable English learned at the expense of constant humiliations. On the same night, under the protection of the shadows, he led healing rituals, incorporating past African knowledge through generations by his grandmother, a Yoruba woman who had survived the Atlantic crossing with medical plants hidden in her braided hair. The confidence that inspired among the enslaved was absolute. When he spoke, even the most skeptical heard. When he suggested caution, even the most impetuous retreated. Cassandra sees beyond, they said. What few knew was that their vision also extended to the future that planned meticulously, a future that began to take definitive form on the day of Elijah Potts's diary, with its detailed notes on each punishment, every humiliation, every life shattered under the system he so faithfully served. Cassandra's paradox lived in this duality. The more confidence he earned from oppressors, the more powerful he became the oppressed. The more accesses you got, the more weapons collected for the day I knew it would arrive. Leave in the comments. Never give up the truth, if you believe justice must reach all the oppressed. The horrors in Willow Creek followed perverse progression, as if the overseers competed with each other to establish new levels of cruelty. In January of that year, Samuel Winston introduced the disciplinary necklace, an iron device with ends facing inward that made the punished unable to lie down for days. In March, the O'Malley brothers brought 3 new Mastons specially trained for persecution exercises that left 2 children permanently disfigured. In May, Jackson Reed inaugurated the confession chair, a nail-covered structure where those accused of indiscipline were tied until admitting infractions that they had often not even committed. Each new atrocity was received with laughs and gifts on the balcony of the big house. Cassandra, serving impassive face drinks, registered each dead alien, each name, each date. At night, in the accommodation, he applied cataplasms to the open wounds as he whispered words of comfort that gradually turned into veiled promises. Isaiah, a 19-year-old caught trying to teach others to read, had her fingertips burned in public. Cassandra was there, forced to hold the basin with boiling water. His eyes found his eyes at the moment when the red, hot iron touched his skin. Something broke inside her at that moment, but something stronger began to graduate. The following week, old Sarah, The midwife who had brought to life 3 generations of children in both the big house and in the housing was whipped to death for supposedly neglect Cornelius's wife during a miscarriage. His body was left hanging for a whole day as a lesson. Cassandra helped cut the rope at night and organized the secret funeral. While covering the body with earth and herbs, his face remained dry, without tears. There was no more room for sadness, only for cold calculation and determination. In July, during a surprise inspection, Elijah Potts found a small African amulet hidden under Josephine's mattress, a 12-year-old girl. The punishment was exemplary: shaved head, 70 whipping, and a week in the hole, an underground cell infested with rats where water reached the ankles. When it was finally removed, his eyes had lost all the shine. That child had disappeared forever, replaced by an empty shell that would not speak again until the day of his death 3 years later. For each horror, Cassandra added a mark to a small stone that kept hidden under a loose board. For each new scar in the community, a new knot was formed on the invisible rope that would once become a bond. The transformation happened quietly inside her. Where before there was fear, now a relentless purpose was growing. Where there was resignation, strategy flourished. The overseers kept seeing only the obedient servant, without realizing that their eyes now studied them not as sources of terror, but as problems to be solved. The summer of 1874 brought with it a suffocating heat that seemed to give something sinister. The oldest said that when the air was so dense that even breathing hurt, some change was on the way. No one imagined how deep this change would be. It was a Sunday of August when Cassandra's world collapsed completely. Her younger sister, Bethany, 16, had recently been transferred to work in the big house as a laundry assistant. Cornelius Blackwood, Jr., the youngest son in the family, had recently returned from his season in Paris, bringing with him new refined tastes and a sense of even greater impunity than usual. Cassandra found Bethany behind the washing shed, the torn dress, finger marks on her neck, blood running down her legs. No words were needed. As he cleaned his sister's wounds with well water, Cassandra kept absolute silence. Only his eyes, fixed at some point on the horizon, revealed the inner storm. That night, while Bethany finally slept under the effect of a tea of soothing herbs, Cassandra performed a private ritual. He cut a lock of his own hair and his sister's hair, intertwined and buried it under the large oak that was exactly between the accommodation and the big house. He lit a small candle made of beeswax that had secretly collected over months. He spoke words on his grandmother's tongue that he didn't say aloud since his childhood. When he returned to the accommodation, Cassandra's face looked sculpted in stone. His previously fluid movements now carried mechanical accuracy. The next day, he served breakfast to the Blackwood family with the same efficiency as always. No one noticed that something fundamental had changed. 3 days later, Bethany was found dead. Suicide, Samuel Winston said after a 5-minute investigation. The body was buried without ceremony in the small cemetery beyond the tobacco fields. Cassandra did not shed a tear during the brief funeral. Instead, his eyes meticulously traveled the faces of the 5 present female, memorizing every detail, every expression, every careless gesture of contempt. That night, kneeling over the newly cloistered grave, Cassandra made a silent promise. He cut his palm with a small knife he had hidden in his skirts and let the blood drip over the earth. The promise did not need words. It was sealed in the flesh and blood, a contract with forces that went beyond the understanding of the men who had destroyed their family. Bethany's death was just the tip of an iceberg of cruelty that had grown for decades in Willow Creek. As in a macabre mosaic, each overseer had developed his own species aid in the kingdom of terror. Jackson Reed, the main foreman, was known for his flagellar ability without killing, keeping the victims conscious throughout the process. The O'Malley brothers had improved human hunting techniques that turned desperate escapes into entertainment shows for special guests. Samuel Winston, with his aristocratic air, preferred psychological torture, separating families, forcing impossible choices, destroying alliances through carefully constructed lies. Elijah Potts, the youngest, combined physical brutality with almost scientific curiosity about the limits of human pain. Above them all, they hovered the Blackwood, not only tolerating, but actively encouraging this system. Senior Cornelius often watched punishments while enjoying his imported brandy. Martha Blackwood personally selected which women would be separated from their children as punishment for minor infractions. The three children, Blackwood, Cornelius Jr., William, and Thomas, had turned abuse into a refined hobby, competing with each other to see who could break the spirit of a new slave faster. That summer, a new element was added to the already volatile mixture. Federal government delegates, allegedly overseeing the implementation of Reconstruction laws, began to make regular visits to the property. Instead of overseeing abuse, however, they established a lucrative scheme with the Blackwood, political protection, in exchange for substantial bribes and special entertainment. It was during one of these visits that the event that served as the final catalyst took place. In a demonstration of power for the delegates, Jackson Reed ordered 3 men to be tied to posts in the central courtyard. The accusation: escape planning. Evidence: a conversation heard by an informant. The sentence: 100 whipping each, followed by iron marking. One of the men was Joshua, a 40-year-old carpenter who had taught Cassandra to read secretly when she was a child. The second was Benjamin, a blacksmith whose skills were so valued that until then he had been spared the most severe punishments. The third was Marcus, just 17, son of old Sarah, the midwife murdered months earlier. The whole community was forced to watch. Cassandra was in the front row, positioned there by express order of Martha Blackwood, who enjoyed observing the reactions of the most privileged during such demonstrations. For 3 hours, the whip went up and down. The screams eventually ceased, replaced by inarticulate moans. The smell of burnt flesh when the red-hot iron touched the skin would remain in the nostrils every day. Marcus did not survive at night. Joshua lost use of the right arm permanently. Benjamin, once a proud and strong man, became a staggering shadow of himself. That night marked the point without return. While cleaning the wounds of the survivors, Cassandra learned that the moment of acting had arrived. The plan that had been taking shape in his mind for years now was crystallized with perfect clarity. It wouldn't just be revenge, it would be justice. It would be a fresh start. It would be a lesson that would echo far beyond the limits of Willow Creek. The next morning, while serving coffee on the porch, Cassandra listened to Jackson Reed announce the preparations for the Harvest Festival, an annual celebration that in 3 weeks would gather plantations owners across the region to display Willow Creek's prosperity and seal new business agreements. "This year," said Reed with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "we'll have special demonstrations to entertain our guests." Cassandra served the last cup, made a perfect bow, and withdrew. On your face, no emotion. In his chest, a watch was starting to mark the countdown. The final humiliation came in the form of a public spectacle. A week before the Harvest Festival, the Blackwood decided that it would be educational to demonstrate the consequences of disobedience. The central courtyard was transformed into a macabre theater, with semicircle seats and a wooden platform erected in the center. Cassandra was chosen as an example for a seemingly trivial reason: a missing silver spoon from the kitchen. Despite its position of relative confidence, or perhaps precisely because of it, its punishment should serve as a reminder that no one was above the system. Under the sunny sun of noon, with the whole community forced to watch, Elijah Potts led the ritual of degradation with evident pleasure. First, Cassandra's clothes were torn to the waist, exposing his back. A murmur toured the crowd. Ancient scars, which few knew existing, revealed that this would not be their first flagellation. 20 whites for the thief, announced Potts, passing the 9, pointed whip from one hand to Outfrog, and 10 more every day the spoon remains missing. The first blow ripped an involuntary scream, not in pain, but by surprise. The following were received in absolute silence. The blood began to drain, staining what was left of his dress. The forced crowd watching his eyes low except for the overseers and Blackwood, who observed with expressions ranging from boredom and morbid fascination. In the 10th fifth blow, something has changed. Cassandra, who had hitherto kept her head down, slowly raised her face. Her dry and clear eyes were fixed to those of Cornelius Blackwood, Jr. There was no supplication in that look, no visible hatred, just deep recognition, as if she finally saw him completely for the first time. The young Blackwood, uncomfortable under that penetrating look, turned his eyes first. When the 20th blow fell, Cassandra had not emitted any more sound. His back was a mass of torn flesh, but his posture remained upright, almost challenging. Potts, annoyed by the lack of reaction, added 5 more silent insolence blows. Still, no sound. Finally released from the posts, Cassandra fell to her knees. 2 women ran to help her, but were prevented by Samuel Winston. "Let her be crawled," he ordered. "Thieves must find their own way back." The courtyard slowly emptied. The Blackwood returned to the big house, already discussing preparations for the festival. The overseers dispersed viewers with threats and occasional blows. Only when everyone was gone, Joshua, the carpenter with one arm, approached slowly and helped Cassandra get up. "It's close," she whispered as he supported her. They were not words of despair, but of absolute certainty. That night, lying on his stomach while gentle hands applied ointment to his wounds, Cassandra made her final decision. There would be no middle ground, there would be no partial escape, there would be no selective mercy. The entire system needed to be dismantled, and it would start with its most zealous executors. When the son was born the next day, Cassandra Monroe, Cassandra everyone knew, had disappeared forever. In his place was a cold strategist, a patient calculating, an architect of a freedom that would cost blood to be conquered. 3 days after public humiliation, with wounds still opened under makeshift bandages, Cassandra began the recruitment phase. His allies were chosen not by physical force or impulsiveness, but for very specific qualities: absolute discretion, precise technical skills, and the ability to follow instructions without question. Joshua the carpenter was the first. His hands, even reduced to 1, knew every structural centimeter of the property. Then Esther, a middle-aged woman who worked in the laundry and had access to all the premises of the big house. Then the twins, Daniel and David, 20-year-olds who took care of the stables and could move around the property without lifting suspicions. Finally, Hannah, a 14-year-old girl who, due to her fragile appearance, was often ignored, becoming invisible and capable of spying on crucial conversations. The meetings took place at the swamp under the pretext of gathering medicinal herbs. Each aspect of the plan was meticulously explained, each function distributed with surgical accuracy. It was not an impulsive conspiracy born of anger. It was a military operation planned by someone who had observed and learned for years. "The harvest festival will take place in 15 days, Cassandra explained, drawing a detailed map of the property on the wetland. "It will be the only time when all 5 overseers will be simultaneously on the property, but sufficiently separated from the big house for our purposes." The plan required resources that seemed impossible to obtain: powerful sedatives, sharp tools, sturdy ropes, access to restricted areas. Cassandra, however, had spent years accumulating an invisible arsenal. From the medical stock of the big house, he had gradually diverted laudano and other opiates. From the kitchen, 5 knives of butcher hidden under the floor of his cabin. Of the barn, strings and hooks originally intended for meat processing. "Each overseer has its specific routine during the festival," she continued, pointing to specific locations on the map. "Jackson Reed always inspects empty accommodation looking for smuggling while everyone is busy with preparations. The O'Malley brothers check the perimeter fences, separated by at least half a mile from each other. Winston supervises the slaves who serve the main party, more concentrated on the impression caused to guests than in real security. Potts." His finger stopped on the symbol that represented the tool shed. "Potts always leave at least one example for special punishment during the festival. This year, he will choose one of us 5. A heavy silence fell on the group. Everyone knew what this meant: a necessary sacrifice. "I will be this example," said Joshua, his only arm surrounding himself in a certain fist. Cassandra nodded slowly. "Success depends on perfect time. If one fails, everyone fails. If one hesitates, everyone dies." The strategy was named Red Harvest, a name that would only be understood when it was too late for those who should have it. The next 15 days were a precise dance of discreet preparations. Each member of the group continued their normal routines, perhaps working with more dedication than usual, avoiding drawing attention. Under this apparent normality, however, the machinery of revenge was carefully assembled. Joshua created 5 identical small notch, a scythe crossed with a key, which would be left as a signature. Hannah, with her eyes attentive and discreet movements, confirmed the exact routines of each overseer during previous events. Esther has prepared specific laudanum and herbs mixtures for each target, calibrated according to their weight and tolerance known to alcohol. The twins mapped all possible escape routes and timed the intervals between the night rounds. Cassandra, meanwhile, returned to work in the kitchen just 3 days after his flagellation, surprising even Martha Blackwood with her apparent recovery capacity. "These creatures are more resistant than ordinary animals," the lady said to her visits. "Note how she can still carry trays with her back in living flesh." Behind the subservience mask, Cassandra finished every detail of the plane. The harvest festival would coincide with the new moon, the darkest night of the month. The property would be full of unknown visitors, creating confusion and perfect distractions. Each movement has been rehearsed mentally hundreds of times. Each contingency, foreseen. Every second, told. On the eve of the festival, when the last sunshine disappeared behind the trees, the 5 conspirators gathered one last time. There were no great speeches or solemn oaths, just a silence loaded with determination, while Cassandra gave each one a small leather bag containing their instruments of freedom. "Tomorrow night," she said finally, "the world we know ends. What will come later, I don't know. But whatever it is, it will be ours to define." The morning of the harvest festival dawned with a perfectly blue sky without a single cloud in sight. Since the first ray of sun, Willow Creek has become an anthill of frantic activity. In the big house, household slaves ran to polish, arrange flowers, and prepare rooms for guests who would start to noon. In the fields, others worked to organize exhibitions of the best crops of the year: cotton whiter than snow, perfect leaf tobacco, swamp rice that rivaled any Carolina production. In absolute contrast with this agitation, in the rooms of the overseers reigned a different atmosphere. Jackson Reed inspected his favorite whip, passing oil on the braided rope to ensure maximum flexibility during the demonstrations scheduled for later. The O'Malley brothers argued excitedly about which of the hunting dogs should receive the honor of participating in the planned show. Samuel Winston meticulously organized a row of torture instruments on a table, such as a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. Elijah Potts wrote in his diary, detailing his expectations for the day and the disciplinary lessons he intended to offer prestigious visitors. In the Casa Big Kitchen, Cassandra worked silently efficiently. His hands moved between pans and spices, preparing elaborate dishes as his eyes occasionally turned to the window, measuring the passage of the sun in the sky. The clean dress he wore hid the bandages under the fabric. His face revealed nothing but professional concentration. Meanwhile, in the accommodation of the enslaved, Hannah was quiet in a corner, braiding a small rope that looked just a children's bracelet. Joshua sharpened a blade disguised as a carpentry tool. The twins Daniel and David fueled the horses of visitors who were beginning to arrive, memorizing every new face, every new opportunity or potential complication. Esther passed among the guests offering drinks, his secret pockets carrying small bottles waiting for the right moment. As the day advanced, 2 parallel realities were developed in Willow Creek. On the surface, the festival continued as planned. Music played gently under the trees decorated with collars, origins. Elegant laughs echoed from the balcony of the big house. Champagne imported from France was served in crystal cups. Below this facade of civilization, however, ran an underground current of almost electric tension. Silent looks were exchanged among the conspirators. Small gestures confirmed that everything was in position. At sunset, lanterns were lit throughout the property, creating golden light islands that contrasting dramatically with the growing darkness. The new moon offered the perfect scenario, a night without heavenly witnesses. In the big house, an elaborate banquet began, with the Blackwood presiding over a table that gathered the elite of the Southern society. In the fields, a separate and carefully controlled celebration was allowed to enslave a gesture of Generosity, of the gentleman who served mainly to keep them busy and under surveillance, while true businesses were conducted in the mansion. It was at this moment that the plan came into action. A discreet sign, a red scarf hanging briefly in the kitchen window, and 5 shadows began to move with methodical purpose. The red harvest had started. Jackson Reed was the first. Following his usual routine, he walked away from the main party to inspect empty housing, looking for smuggling or signs of escape planning. When he entered the 3rd cabin, Joshua was already waiting for him, hidden in the shadows. A precise blow to the back of the neck with a piece of wood was enough to stun him. Before he could scream, a cloth soaked in Esther's mixture covered his mouth and nose. In minutes he was unconscious, tied firmly, and being dragged to the abandoned barn on the limits of the property, the place designated for the final harvest. Patrick O'Malley, inspecting the west, found Hannah apparently lost in the dark. "What do you do here, little?" he asked, a family malice coloring his voice. The answer came in the form of an acute whistle that perfectly imitated the call of a night bird. Before O'Malley could react, the twins emerged from the darkness behind him. The fight was brief and silent. The overseer soon joined Reed in the barn. Connor O'Malley proved more challenging. Suspecting his brother's disappearance, his gun had pulled out and moved cautiously from the eastern perimeter. It was Esther who intercepted him, purposely stumbling in front of him as if he were drunk. "Forgive me, Lord," he murmured, spilling accidentally a drink in his coat. As O'Malley cursed and pushed her, he did not notice the small needle that penetrated his arm during contact. The sedative was formulated especially for him, a man known for his alcohol tolerance. In 10 minutes, his legs fraggled. In 15, Joshua and Daniel carried him discreetly to join the others. Samuel Winston remained at the main party longer than expected, complicating the schedule. Cassandra, serving desserts, kept him under constant surveillance. When she finally went out to take a fresh air, she signaled to David with an almost imperceptible movement of the head. The young man approached the overseer with an urgent message manufactured. "Mr. Reed requests his presence at the stable immediately, sir. Something about one of the guests trying to steal a horse." Winston, always concerned with impressions, went quickly to the indicated place. There, instead of Reed, he found only darkness, and then the momentary glow of a blade. Elijah Potts was ultimately left purposely. As Cassandra predicted, he had chosen Joshua as example for his night demonstration. When she arrived at the tool shed to prepare the show, she found not a terrified man, but Cassandra sitting calmly on a barrel, her hands bent over her lap. "What do you do here?" he demanded, his hand already moving to the whip at his waist. "Waiting for you," she replied, her smoother and calm voice than she had ever been in your presence. "Everyone is waiting for you." Confusion crossed Potts's face for just 1 second before understanding hit him. He turned to flee, but the door was already blocked by Joshua, the same man he planned to torture for entertainment. Panic in his eyes was the last emotion he experienced before darkness swallows him. At 10 o'clock at night, while the music and laughs of the main party reached their peak, Willow Creek's 5 overseers were gathered in the abandoned barn. Awakened from their induced unconsciousness, they were tied to wood posts in a perfect circle, a dark parody of the punishment platform that had used so many times. Around them, 50 lanterns formed a circle of merciless light. Cassandra slowly entered the lighted space, followed by the other 4 conspirators. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice clear and firm, "welcome to your harvest." What followed was not a show of prolonged torture as the overseers could have expected, or perhaps feared. There were no vindictive discourses elaborated or recapitulation of past cruelties. Instead, Cassandra approached each man, looked at him straight into the eyes for a long moment, and then said simply, "This is Bethany," or "This is old Sarah," or "This is by Marcus," or any other name from a long list of victims. The executions were fast and methodical. The same tools that had been used to subjugate and punish now served a final purpose. Each overseer received a precise and deep cut that reflected their particular specialty. When he finished, Cassandra placed in each body the little symbol carved by Joshua, the scythe crossed with the key, and then signaled. The other conspirators spilled lamp oil over the scene and, with a single match, turned the barn into a funeral pyre visible by miles. In the big house, the sudden flash momentarily interrupted the party. Cornelius Blackwood sent 2 guards to investigate, assuming that some drunk enslaved had caused an accident. But Cassandra had already returned silently to the kitchen, resuming her duties as if nothing had happened. In the pocket of his apron, a key, the same represented in the symbol of the scythe, awaited his next use. While the flames consumed the barn and its occupants, a silent transformation was already beginning in the accommodation. Long, prepared bags were taken from hiding places. Children were kindly awakened and instructed to remain in absolute silence. Improvised weapons were distributed, not for combat, but for protection during the coming journey. The fire on the horizon was not just an act of revenge, it was a sign, a guide star for a new beginning. The real harvest was yet to come. While the flames of the barn illuminated the night sky, a silent transformation took place throughout Willow Creek. In the housing, men and women moved with silent purpose, gathering scarce belongings, sleepy children, and carefully guarded hopes. The vision of fire did not bring panic, but a tacit understanding. The moment had come. Cassandra emerged from the big house through the back door, his hands now carrying no food trays, but the key to the weapons deposit. The plan had never been just about revenge, it was about total liberation. With the deleted overalls and the confusion, the window of opportunity was open, but it would remain so for just a few precious hours. In the open space between the accommodation, a makeshift meeting took shape. Losts illuminated by the orange shine of the distant fire showed a mixture of emotions: fear, hope, determination, disbelief. Cassandra climbed into a wooden stump, the same platform where so many punishments had been announced, and spoke low, but clearly. The path is open. We have weapons, we have maps, we have food for 3 days. Those who want to leave, come now. Those who should stay will not be tried. Of 87 people, 75 chose to follow. The others, very elderly, very sick or simply very fearful, would remain to witness the dawn of a new day in Willow Creek. Joshua distributed the weapons, rifles and pistols taken from the now open deposit. There were not many, just enough for protection. Esther organized small family groups, each led by someone who knew the way to the swamps. The twins David and Daniel had already prepared 3 wagons covered with essential groceries and space for those who could not walk. Hannah carried a detailed map designed with memory by Cassandra, showing safe routes through the swamps to a free black community to 40 miles to the north. The starting ritual was brief. There were no grandiose speeches or premature celebrations, just a circle formed under the great oak. Each person took a small handful from the land of Willow Creek, a land that had worked under brutal coercion, a land that had watered with blood and tears, a land that ironically knew better than their alleged owners. "This land knows us," Cassandra said, letting her own handful run down between her fingers. "We take your strength with us, but we leave our chains behind." With this simple gesture, the spine began to move. Fragmented families were temporarily recomposed. Children who had never been out of the boundaries of the plantation looked with wide eyes to darkness beyond. Elderly whispered prayers in tongues that the Blackwood had never understood. Some cried silently. Others walked with expressions of stone determination. The fire in the barn continued to burn, providing not only distraction, but also soft light iscient for the spine to guide through the cotton fields that now left behind. Before the first alarm was sounded in the big house, even before someone realized that something more serious than an accidental fire was taking place, the fugitives had already reached the swamp. There, on the border between the known world and the unknown, Cassandra stopped briefly. In front of him, he extended an uncertain path, full of dangerous slave hunters, treacherous marshes, the long arm of the law that did not recognize them as humans. Behind her, Willow Creek's lights fluttered like stars falling. In his pocket, a small bottle, his last mixture. Not a poison for others, but one for itself if it was captured. Freedom had many prices, and she was willing to pay them all. Beside him, Joshua looked questionedly at the property they left behind. The original plan ended with the execution of the overseers. What would come later was unknown land, both literally and figuratively. "Don't look back," Cassandra said, her voice carrying a softness that few had heard before. "There is nothing there that belongs to us the most." With these words, she turned and entered the swamp, leading no longer a conspiracy of revenge, but an exodus for freedom. Behind her, 74 souls followed each step, pushing them away not only from Willow Creek, but from an existence defined by others. The last to enter the swamp was an 8-year-old boy who, looking back one last time, saw an image he would keep forever. The red sky on the finally granted Blackwood property, and the beginning of a story that would tell his own children many years later. The morning after the massacre, the news spread across the region with the speed of a fire in Campo Seco. Official reports described the events in clinical and impersonal terms. 5 Blackwood property supervision employees were brutally murdered during a slave turmoil. The bodies were found severely mutilated, with symbolic marks indicating premeditated and organized action. About 75 slaves are disappeared, presumably fled to northern swamps. Alarmed letters circulated among the owners of neighboring plantations. The method employed suggests a disturbing level of coordination. The perpetrators seem to have acted with military accuracy, choosing a night of celebration to maximize confusion and minimize resistance. More worrying is the symbol left in each victim, a wide, ranked organization that may have infiltrated other properties. In the following weeks, reports of similar attacks began to emerge. A plantation in the neighboring Canton reported 3 fans found dead with the same symbol. A slave merchant was found in his boat on the Ashley River, his throat cut and the symbol carved on the deck. A particularly cruel auctioneer was discovered in his lifeless Charleston office, with the now dreaded symbol painted on the wall with his own blood. None of these later events was Cassandra's work or his original group, which at that time had already dispersed in small family units seeking separate ways for freedom. However, the seed they planted had found fertile soil in the despair and determination of others. The scythe method, as it became known in the official circles, became a spectrum that haunted the nightmares of the oppressors. The authorities responded with disproportionate force. Militia were formed specifically to hunt Willow Creek fugitives. Exorbitant rewards were offered by Cassandra Monroe, now elevated in the official narratives of Simple Cook, to the terror architect. The swamps were systematically searched, hunting dogs were imported especially from the north, and atrocities were committed against anyone suspected of sheltering fugitives. Private correspondences between government officials revealed a deeper fear, rarely publicly admitted. The real danger is not in violent acts itself, but in the inspiration they offer to others. The idea that slaves may not only escape, but successfully retaliate, represents an existential threat to our way of life. This fear manifested itself in new draconian laws, exemplary punishments, and intensified surveillance. Paradoxically, these measures only served to feed the fire Cassandra had lit. In each new restriction, in each new act of official brutality, the story of the Red Harvest gained new supporters and supporters. For those still enslaved, the symbol of the scythe and key has become a secret brand of hope, scribbled on the walls of the accommodation, drawn in the poe, whispered in night stories. For you, it became a symbol of terror, a constant reminder that the system they created contained within itself the seeds of their own destruction. In Charleston's exclusive mansions and clubs, where crops and auctions were previously discussed with the same casualty of the mood, it was now talking about nervous tones about reinforced security and double surveillance shifts. The confidence that had sustained generations of oppression was beginning to show cracks that no law or military force could completely repair. Meanwhile, the original members of Cassandra's group followed different ways. Some managed to reach northern states. Others found a refuge in communities isolated from Maroons, fugitive slave groups that had established hidden settlements in remote areas. Some were captured and faced horrible deaths as an example. The fate of the majority would remain unknown, their names becoming part of the legend that grew around it. The symbol that left behind, however, continued his own journey, transcending his creators to become something greater, a resistance hieroglyph that would be recognized and feared for decades. The authorities' response to mass escape and the murder of the 5 overseers was fast and brutal. State troops were mobilized, reinforced by private militias financed by a consortium of owners of plantations alarmed with the precedent that the incident established. The swamps north of Charleston, traditionally avoided by slave hunters due to their natural dangers, were invaded by forces that exceeded the fugitives in proportion from 10 to 1. The military strategy was simple and relentless. Surround the area into a perimeter of 20 miles, divide the territory into quadrants, and methodically clean each section. Hunting dogs specially trained were brought from Virginia. Local guides' knowledge of the swamps were hired, some voluntarily, others under coercion. Huge rewards were offered by information that led to the capture of fugitives, especially Cassandra. Anticipating this answer, the original group had been divided into smaller units after the first night. Whole families followed different routes, guided by memorized maps during the preparations. The strategy was not so much to avoid capture indefinitely, but to gain enough time for some, perhaps many, to achieve freedom. It was during the third week of the hunt that the first significant group was found. A family of 7 people, including a pregnant woman and 2 young children, has been trapped in a small island in the middle of the swamp. The exchange of shots that followed was brief and unilateral. When the smoke dissipated, all the adults were dead. The children, captured living, were returned to Blackwood property as example of what happens with fugitives. This first capture revealed something that deeply disturbed the authorities. None of the dead were Cassandra Monroe or any of the 4 main conspirators. The true architect of the plan was still missing. In the following weeks, more groups were located and captured or killed. Each new success, however, brought the same disconcerting revelation. Cassandra seemed to have disappeared as a smoke. Rumors began to circulate. Some said she had reached Canada, others who was hidden in Charleston planning new attacks. The most superstitious whispered that she had made a pact with supernatural forces in the swamps, becoming a vengeful spirit that no bullet could achieve. The truth, as often happens, was both worldly and more extraordinary. Cassandra, along with Joshua, Hannah, Esther, and the twins, had chosen not to flee immediately to the north as the others. Instead, they remained on the periphery of the swamps, moving constantly, using their superior ground knowledge to avoid hunters while helping other groups to escape. It was during the 6th week of the hunt that a slave captured finally broke under torture and revealed the temporary hiding place of the main group. A force of 50 gunmen converged to an abandoned cabin in the depths of the Caw swamp. What they found was a trap. The cabin was empty, but surrounded by deep swamps on 3 sides. When the first soldiers entered the structure, hidden strings were pulled, knocking the roof and blocking the main output. The following confrontation was chaotic and bloody. Joshua and the twins, strategically positioned in the surrounding trees, opened fire with stolen rifles. Esther and Hannah released traps prepared in advance, covered wells, makeshift spears, and sharp branches that swing and lethal trajectories when strings were cut. At the center of the action was Cassandra, no longer the cook of soft movements, but a military strategist in his element. Their orders were given in silent gestures and whistles that mimicked swamp birds, a code developed during the weeks of preparation. For almost an hour, the small group kept a force that surpassed them numerically. But the mathematics of war rarely favors the outcome. One by one, the defenders fell. First Daniel, hit in the chest as he reloaded. After David, trying to protect the body of his twin brother. Esther was seriously wounded, but managed to drag himself to the temporary security of a small mount. Joshua, with only one functional arm, continued to shoot his last cartridge. When he was finally surrounded, he rose slowly, threw the empty gun at the feet of his persecutors, and said the words that would be repeated and transformed into legend. The harvest is over, but the seed was planted. A shot ended his life before he could say more. Hannah, the youngest in the group, was captured alive. Her destination would be to return to Willow Creek to a public example aimed at reinstalling the order. As for Cassandra, conflicting reports emerged about their final moments. The official version stated that she had been trapped on the bank of a deep swamp, wounded by multiple shots, and then devoured by an alligator as she tried to escape the swimming. This convenient story allowed the authorities to declare the end of the threat without presenting a body as proof. Other reports, whispered among the enslaved and passed from generation to generation, told a different story. They said that Cassandra, seeing her companions fall and knowing that the end was near, had swallowed the content of the little bottle that always carried, not a poison like many believed, but a powerful hallucinogen prepared with swamp plants, following ancestral recipes from her grandmother. Under its purpose, they said, she walked straight to the soldiers shooting, reciting names, dozens of names, hundreds perhaps, from people who had suffered and died in Willow Creek. The bullets hit her, but she continued to advance, her body absorbing impact after impact without falling, until finally disappeared into the dark waters of the swamp. Whatever the truth about their final moments, the impact of their actions transcended their physical existence. The tragic grandeur of his resistance has established a new paradigm in the collective imagination, not only of a passive victim, but of an agent of his own liberation, willing to pay the maximum price not only for his own freedom, but by many others. In the years followed by Willow Creek's red harvest, the story of Cassandra Monroe and his companions gradually became a terrifying news into legend and eventually into myth. In the southern black communities, his name was whispered with reverence. In secret enslaved meetings planning escapes or small acts of resistance, the symbol of the scythe and the key appeared scribbled on walls, carved in trees, drawn on earth. Reports of sightings began to emerge throughout the region. Travelers swore he saw a woman in a white dress walking over the waters of the swamps on full moon nights. Lost children in the woods came home talking about a gentle lady who had guided them back. Particularly cruel females woke up terrified, claiming that a female figure had appeared at the foot of his beds, only to fade when they lit the lamps. Objects associated with history have acquired almost sacred qualities. A kitchen knife supposedly used by Cassandra was passed from hand to hand as a protective talisman. A piece of the fabric of his blood-stained dress was divided into tiny fragments that served as amulets for women facing difficult delivery. One of Elijah Potts, partially burnt recovered from the barn, became a secret document, studied by those who planned their own escapes. Songs were composed, first in elaborate codes that hid their true meaning, then more openly as time passed. The Lady of the Swamp, the Cook with the Knife, Harvest on the New Moon, all celebrated in different ways the same history of resistance and calculated revenge. The Willow Creek property never completely recovered. The Blackwood tried to rebuild their fortune, importing new enslaved and hiring even more brutal fans. But yield has never returned to previous levels. The fields seemed less fertile, the harvests inexplicably waned, mysterious diseases afflicted cattle. Persistent rumors claimed that the land had been cursed, not by supernatural forces, but by the blood of those who had suffered there our generations. Cornelius Blackwood died 5 years after the incident, found in his bathtub with cut wrists. The instrument of suicide, if it was suicide, as the official version insisted, was a kitchen knife with a small cable-carved symbol, a cross, wide scythe. The big house was eventually abandoned and fell in ruins. In the following decades, the site became the destination of secret pilgrimages. People traveled hundreds of miles to leave small offerings in Greater Carvalho. Wildflowers, colored ribbons, sometimes a plate of food prepared according to old recipes. It was not exactly religious veneration, but something equally deep, the recognition of a moment when the unacceptable was rejected, when resistance triumphed even briefly on systematic oppression. Of the 75 who escaped the fateful night, it is estimated that at least 40 they have achieved permanent freedom. Some arrived in Canada, others found refuge in isolated communities, some have established new identities in northern cities. His descendants, spread across the country today, carry fragments of history in middle names, family stories, in small preserved symbols. The Academy eventually became interested in the case, first as a criminological study, then as a sociological analysis, and finally as a crucial chapter in the history of slave resistance. Theses were written, heated debates emerged about the morality of employed methods, conflicting interpretations emerged about the meaning and impact of events. But while academics argued in air, conditioned rooms, popular memory followed their own course. In communities that descended from those who lived under oppression, Cassandra Monroe was not a case of study, but a symbol of something fundamental and irreducible in the human spirit: absolute refusal to accept dehumanization, no matter the cost. To this day, at certain parts of the swamps north of Charleston, they say that on new moon nights, when darkness is deeper and the wind whispers among the cypresses, a female figure can be seen walking on the waters. In one hand it carries an old key, in the other a small silver scythe. His face shows no hatred or revenge, just a serene determination and the silent promise that no injustice remains forever unanswered. If you watched so far, it is because you care about these stories that marked our country forever. Leave a comment saying, "I watched here," so that I can meet you and know who really cares about the search for historical truth. Like this video, if Cassandra's story touched her heart. Share so that Cassandra's memory is never forgotten.